I can't explain to you how frustrating it is to see so many people in denial. I would love to talk more about this. For everyone who saw my last video and put a comment saying that we're already free, everything's fine, you are in delusional denial. You are experiencing cognitive dissonance, and many of you have Stockholm Syndrome. So let's talk more about how we are occupied, how we're living in a prison system. Right off the bat, the Federal Reserve. You need to understand what the Federal Reserve is. It is a criminal organization. Its entire business model is a Ponzi scheme. Literally, I'm not being facetious, I'm not exaggerating, I'm not using a metaphor. It's literally a Ponzi scheme. They stole, by coercion and violence and deception, the power to print and control money from nations, from this country, and then do it themselves as a private organization. They then started printing their version of the currency, not legitimate currency, not American currency, Federal Reserve currency. The Federal Reserve is a private organization. They put federal in there the same way the Bank of London calls it the Bank of London to make you think it's in a government organization, but it's not. Then they loaned that money to people and charged them interest. Let me say that again. They printed pieces of paper with numbers on them and then gave them to people and told those people that they now owed them money. So they created wealth out of thin air. On top of that, they control the interest rates, which means we don't live in a free market economy. We live in a controlled economy. By controlling the printing of money and setting the interest rates and having other regulatory powers on Wall Street, you effectively control the entire economy. When they want it to crash, they crash it. And when they crash it, they blame everyone but themselves and say how they need to have more powers to be able to stabilize the market. So there's your economic prison. And then we have the educational prison, right? Our entire public school system is based off the Russian Soldiers Academy to create workers and soldiers and people who just obey. They put fluoride in the drinking water intentionally across the entire country. And where they couldn't put it in the drinking water, they gave you fluoride tablets. Fluoride is a neurotoxin. The only use for fluoride is to make contact directly with your teeth and rebuild them, except fluoride actually destroys your teeth. You need nanohypoxyapatite. But they know this. Saying that it was good for your teeth was only an excuse, because you'd only have it touch your teeth. You wouldn't swallow it. It's poison when you swallow it. Guess what else they put fluoride in? The baby formula. So much so that you couldn't use tap water. Remember, parents, when you had to use distilled water to mix the baby formula because it would be toxic otherwise? It is now illegal here and in many countries in Europe to criticize a state that's committing a genocide right now. Capitol Hill does whatever they want. They just make new laws and mandates and rules all the time that go completely against your constitutional and human rights. Which means you don't have to pay taxes, except they'll still arrest you. What does that mean? Their power lies wholly in the fact that they can exert power upon you, exert force upon you, be violent. They enforce their reign only through violence. That's all they have left. They've broken every single agreement. They live based on force. That's not an agreement. That's enslavement. That's imprisonment. We don't get here accidentally. We don't create a bunch of inhumane systems if we're all human. There's something very unhuman about whoever creates these things. And if you look at history, if you study this, just the last 100 years, just the last 120 years, and you watch what these powerful forces, organizations, and people have done, they have continually added more controls, more oppression, more stealing from you, more taking away from your ability to govern yourself, and we can barely grow organic vegetables without the FBI up our asses. We are under occupation. It should be totally obvious. And everyone in those comments that was saying, oh, we're free, everything's really good, and the Soul Matrix has been dissolved. I channeled it on Thursday. It's like, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up. You can be free in your mind right now, all the time. That's great. But we are physically enslaved. We are physically imprisoned. And we should probably try to get out of that situation instead of being delusional and trying to get other people brainwashed into your delusion. We have a serious problem. We should fix the problem instead of being cowards. No, we're already free. Everything's fine. No, it's not. It's terrible. It's god awful. This is probably the worst situation human beings have ever been in. Okay, because when the Industrial Revolution happened and people started getting forced out of nature and into these cities and they started getting sick en masse, disease increased, violence increased, that was just one thing that still exists today. When public school became compulsory, like parents could be thrown in jail if they didn't send their kids off to brainwashing and propaganda, that's insane. If you don't realize just from that example that you're a prisoner being held against your will, that you can't decide how your kid gets educated, that you are forced to give up your child to the state to be educated on state propaganda, and you don't have any say. Some people are able to homeschool and all that, but the hoops you have to jump through. As a parent, the only thing you should have to say is, no thanks. No thanks. Because there's nothing in the Constitution that says compulsory education. They made that law afterwards and they didn't get your consent. We didn't vote on that. And even if we did, majority vote, 51%, it's not fair to the other 49% that wouldn't want their kids to be in public school. The whole system is constructed to control everyone. And what do? They brainwash people the most in the big cities. And they remove them from the understanding that there is an intimate relationship with us and nature and each other. And then they confuse all them, and that's the majority of the vote. And they get them to vote any way they want them to. That's why they want you in the big cities, and that's why the big cities are the worst and the most violent, because it's the center of that degradation. It's the center of that corruption. And they get all them to think the same way, and then they enforce those city attitudes on the rest of the country. But if they got out of that city and they took a camping trip, or they worked on a farm for the summer, everything would change. They would return back to a normal human being, and they would remember. And they would start to realize how bad the situation actually is. We're being poisoned in our water, in our food, in our education. These tech companies, the risks they are taking with collective mental well-being is insane. And the CIA test chemicals and weapons on their own citizens all the time. That's not a country. That's a prison. It should be clear to everyone. And come on. This toxic positivity, denial, cowardly, delusional bullshit is just as bad as those people that are endorsing this shit. Because deep down inside, there's something wrong. And if we don't do something about it, if we don't say something about it, and we don't live in resistance to that, it'll just get worse and worse and worse and worse. I'm able to show you the document where they admit to imprisoning us. Of course not. If they're good at what they do, which they are, the entire system is so pervasive it controls every aspect of their life, they're not just going to expose themselves. But it should be obvious by the fruits of the labor, by how hard they've worked at this, that every single decision they make takes more freedom away from us, more health away from us, more critical thinking, more free speech. It just keeps happening over and over again. They must like the result. In the end, it will be the evil of the few and the inaction of the many.